You are listening to the Beltway Wars Invitational podcast with your hosts Adam Jackson and Patrick Wheelton. Enjoy the show.
And welcome back to the Beltway Wars Invitational podcast show for the Week 12 edition with your wonderful hosts, as always, Adam Jackson and Patrick Wheelton on the horn here for Week 12, getting to the nitty-gritty here, getting to the end of the regular season for the Beltway Wars, starting to get a little bit of playoff vibes from some teams, and maybe even some teams are falling out of favor here, falling out of that top 7. But Patrick, as I ask you every single week, and you never have an answer, you've been more prepared last week. Anything from Week 12 around the NFL that you saw that kind of piqued your interest?
Well, first, before we get into Week 12, you always introduce us as your wonderful hosts. Like, find a new word. Like, wonderful. I don't know.
Okay, I'll write that
I
down.
challenge you to use. I challenge you to use a new word every week to describe us.
Okay.
Um,
Since we only have 2 more weeks of the podcast show,
2 more. Oh, we might do some playoff specials.
we said that last year. We did not.
Well, I think you and I are at the top of the pack. We're both heavily invested this year, right? So we're feeling good, and rightfully so. No, well, let's see. You got your first loss this week. That's the big news. I was not going to bring that up, but you wanted to talk about it. We'll get into your game, but what's your instant reaction? When did you know that you were cooked?
See, after the Thursday games, I felt okay because I kind of brought it back even with Jake after he had McCaffrey and Prescott, but then I had Hill on Black Friday and Amon-Ra and Mostert, so like I was kind of staying with him there. But once Mike Evans and Olave started going off, Najee Harris scoring a touchdown, that's kind of knew when I was done.
Yeah, so Mike Evans, right? That's
right.
That was a former
and Dak.
former member
And Dak.
And Dak as well, yeah. So that trade is looking pretty good for Jake right now.
Yeah, for sure.
But in terms of NFL news, the 2 things that kind of stood out to me this week, obviously the Carolina Panthers have fired Frank Reich after just, I think it was 11 games. 11 games this season. He was brought in the offseason to take control of that Panthers team, and he is now gone. Lots of social media buzz today about the owner, David Tepper, who has gone through coaches like nobody's business. He actually also owns, either a soccer team or it's some other professional sports team, and he has gone through 2 or 3 coaches in the last 18 months. So lots of history there, and the Carolina Panthers, worst in the league in terms of record, don't have a first-round pick next year. They traded away a lot of their future draft capital. So not a good time to be a Panthers fan, but a better time to be a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. Now that offensive coordinator Matt Canada was canned, their first game, they went over 400 yards. Their offense looked better. They didn't score a lot of points. It was a low-scoring game, but the offense looked more productive. 421 yards, I believe. It's the first time in 58 games under Matt Canada that they have gone over 400 yards. Matt Canada did not have a single...
Man, Canada's been there that long?
I believe that is the stat that I heard, is that 58 games under Matt Canada, they did not go 400 yards of offense. And every other team in the league in that same span did that at least 3 times. So the fact that they did it is very telling in the first game without Canada calling the shots.
Very, very interesting, Pent. Yeah, I mean, they just look. I mean, they didn't score a lot of points, but they definitely were moving the ball. So anyone with some Pittsburgh Steelers can maybe look forward to maybe a new revamped Pittsburgh Steelers offense. But let's get started here with the first matchup of the day with our league leading scorer here for week 12. That'd be Jake, finally getting me on the board with my first loss of the season. So I'm going to play a nice little sound effect celebrating Jake's victory. So Jake here gets the victory. Now goes at 6-6 on the season. Was left for dead basically at the beginning of the season, but as you mentioned, made some savvy trades and was able to get quality players out of it. Dak Prescott and Mike Evans showing out for Week 12. And like I said, Dak Prescott, 32 points. I think he led all quarterbacks this week. 331 yards, 4 touchdowns through the air with a 2-point conversion. Christian McCaffrey scores 2 touchdowns on the day with over 100 yards rushing. Limited involvement in the passing game, but does get 5 catches on the day. Just Mike Evans, the other trade piece that I sent to Jake for some reason, 6 for 9, 70 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Chris Olave goes over 100 yards on 9 targets. Cole Kmet, 7 for 7, 43. You'll take that out of a tight end. Najee Harris, as we were just talking about with the Steelers offense, 15 carries, 99 yards, and a touchdown. Looking at his bench, some kind of intriguing stuff here. You have Christian Watson, 5 for 7, 94 yards and a touchdown. Brandon Cooks, 4 for 5, 72 and a touchdown. But the main thing I want to talk about here is Zach Moss. He has actually come back and is actually part of the fantasy football conversation now with the news that Jonathan Taylor is having surgery on his right thumb and is going to be out multiple weeks.
Oh, yeah, that's how you're saying. Okay, gotcha. I thought I was fully prepared for the question on what should Jake do with that situation next week, because he's kind of behind a few players in this logjam of running backs. Good problem to have, but Christian McCaffrey, he's certainly going to be playing. So your decision comes down to you've got Rachaad White, who continues to really be excellent. I mean, he's got 6 straight games of 12 or more fantasy points. So this is a guy that has come on over the last 6 weeks to become the number 8 running back in fantasy football. Najee Harris, equally a guy, hasn't been on fire for quite as long, but 3 of his last 4, he's 14 or more in fantasy points. So very startable options. We, of course, know what Zach Moss can do without any competition for carries, but we'll see what happens. I don't know. I like all these guys moving forward. Do any of them happen to have a bye left next week, or are all of these guys playing?
Pittsburgh's had their bye.
Yeah, they're all playing. They're all good to go. So yeah, I think you're probably sitting Moss, but man, he's showing that this team has depth. If anything happens to McCaffrey, he's got Mitchell there. Beckham has looked good. Cooks, Watson. These are all guys that could start in a pinch. There's nobody on this roster that I question, or that are kind of fringe bubble players to have on a roster. So we started talking mostly about the bench because it's so good, but this starting lineup has been really good too. You mentioned Dak Prescott and Mike Evans. It's starting to look almost like Jake has fleeced you on this trade. Both of these guys have had 2 of the best second halves of any player in the league. Evans, similar to Rachaad White, he has 6 straight games of 10 or more fantasy points. So these guys are putting up numbers. Jake's comeback in this league has been epic. It has been a story to watch. We've, of course, been talking about it. He's just sort of stayed the course. And guess what? He's got himself back to 500. He's got himself back to 6-6. And that, as we know, anything can happen with the parity that we have in this league at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, just some little bit of concerns here. Chris Olave is out with a concussion. Looks like they're not sure about him yet. So maybe, who you starting there. You have some options. You have Christian Watson, Brandon Cooks, maybe even Odell Beckham. But in terms of Zach Moss, I think I'm starting him over Najee Harris next week. Najee has Arizona, which is a plus matchup, and Zach Moss has Tennessee. You would start Najee Harris over Zach Moss next week?
You said Najee has who? Arizona? Oh, yeah. I think you got to go with Najee. 15 carries, 99 yards, got the touchdown. I think you got to stick with Harris. His workload lately has been good. We saw now what he's doing without Matt Canada. He had a 15-point fantasy game against the Bengals. Arizona is one of the teams that you can run on all day, so I think you got to stick with Harris.
All right, very good.
The bigger question that I have for you is more about the wide receivers.
Okay.
Assuming Olave plays, assuming he comes out of his concussion protocol, Evans and Olave are starting. Who does that third wide receiver go
Romeo
to?
Dobbs.
Probably.
This is the other one he started this week.
The other one he started, yeah. But what do you do? I mean, he's so hit or miss. I mean, you've got his teammate Watson, who is equally hit or miss, but has been a little bit more hit lately. You've got Brandon Cooks there, who's been kind of experiencing a surge in production, and you've got Odell Beckham. Would you start any of those guys instead of Dobbs?
For sure. I'm probably starting Christian Watson over Dobbs. I just think he's the more talented player. He came on fast last year near the end. The rapport with Jordan Love's getting much better. So I think I would definitely start Watson over Dobbs. I think out of those four, I'm starting Watson.
Yeah, it's a tough matchup against the Chiefs defense, who has really come on as of late. But yeah, that could figure to be a high-scoring game. They could be throwing in that one. So I think I'd probably agree with you there.
But let's go over to the losing side this week. My first loss of the season.
Everybody has tasted defeat.
Now everyone in the Beltway Wars Invitational has a loss on the season. But let's just go down my roster, my starting roster. I started Kyler Murray here. That proved to be prudent on my side. 24 for 45, 256, a touchdown, and a rushing touchdown against the Rams. Alvin Kamara gets the volume, but 14 points you'll take, but you really need a touchdown there. Joe Mixon, who I'm going to want to talk about after I go through, 8 for 16, a bit against a tough defense there in Pittsburgh, but only getting 8 attempts is kind of scary in such a close game. Tyreek Hill, continue doing Tyreek Hill things. I think that he is on track to break the receiving record, the single-season receiving record. Gets 20 points against the Jets. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 9 for 11, 95 yards, never forget. And then, you kind of have some disappointments here. Deontay Johnson with the new look offense, 4 for 8, like the targets, but not very efficient. Dalton Kincaid comes back down to earth with a high-scoring game. But then also Raheem Mostert with Devin Achane out, 20 carries, 94 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the ground. I scored 124. That's a pretty good score most weeks. I just ran into a juggernaut this week. But just looking through my bench here, Ramondre Stevenson, I love the 21 carries. I think he's finally gotten a stranglehold on that starting running back. But, of course, next week, Ezekiel Elliott will have 25 carries. And then Pat Freiermuth, who has been out most of the year, 9 for 11, 120 yards. Definitely a viable starting tight end in this league.
Yeah, you certainly got really great production across the board here. I mean, third highest total in points this week, and unfortunate to get the loss. But very interesting. I mean, pretty good decisions here. Starting Kyler Murray, I believe that's his first start for your team this year. Sitting Justin Herbert against the Ravens defense proved to be a smart move. 13 points compared to 20 for Kyler Murray. So very nice there. And I remembered Kyler Murray's name this week. So that's a positive from me. But I agree with you. I mean, Joe Mixon, this offense, this Bengals team is not very good. This AFC North division has really taken a hit with the quarterback situations that are going on for everybody but Baltimore. But Joe Mixon really looks like he may suffer quite a bit from this significant drop-off at the quarterback position. He goes for his season low 8 carries. It was a slugfest game against the Steelers, kind of an ugly, very gritty AFC North battle. You figure that maybe Mixon would get more work in that. I don't know what the deal was. His snap percentage continues to slightly fade. He's down to 65%. That's down from high 70s earlier in the season. So his workload has taken a little bit of a slide gradually through the course of the season. And you mentioned Ramondre Stevenson on the bench. His kind of value has gone up in recent weeks. He's now got 2 straight weeks of 20 or more carries after not hitting that number at all earlier in the season. He played his season high snap percentage at 78%. And oh, by the way, he's got 11 or more fantasy points in 5 of his last 6. So he's starting to become maybe like he's making the obvious case to crack the starting lineup for sure. And then I think you're right to point out Pat Freiermuth, even though, you may play the matchups between him and Dalton Kincaid. But Freiermuth was excellent. 9 for 11. That's got to make you feel good. You've got him as a potential guy to slide in your lineup in good matchups. Clearly, that offense, the game plan there was to run through the tight end, to keep the ball on the ground. Like you said, it resulted in maybe some inefficient games for the receivers, but it seems like they may want to become more of a ground and pound, throw to the tight end, keep it simple game plan.
Yeah, for sure. And Dalton Kincaid is on bye this week, so he will. Pat Freiermuth will definitely be in the lineup against Arizona. My bigger question is: has Ramondre Stevenson improved enough in the last 3 games to be slid in before Joe Mixon for the starting lineup? Joe Mixon. So let's just go with next week. Joe Mixon has Jacksonville, and Ramondre Stevenson has the Chargers.
Boy, I think for me it's Stevenson.
Yeah.
I'm really concerned. I almost am in this spot of wanting to see it from Mixon with the situation that they have in there with Jake Browning. He was able to kind of salvage his day with the touchdown against the Ravens a couple weeks ago. But other than that, and that was a half Burrow, half Browning game. So in the first Browning game, things looked really bad.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm curious to see what you're feeling, but I'm sort of leaning Stevenson right now.
I am leaving, especially for next week. I'm leaning Stevenson. You can run on the Chargers, and Jacksonville has a above average run defense, so I will probably be starting Stevenson. I'll wait for some of the experts' rankings to come out, but I am leaning Stevenson as of now. So let's go to our next highest scorer here. That would be. I was the 4th highest scoring team actually this week.
Oh.
So we go to Tom here, who's back on top with a 148.16. Now goes to 5-7 on the season. CJ Stroud, he starts here over Lamar Jackson, as that's been a conversation. Was the right decision. 304, 2 touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown. Now quarterback number 6 on the year. Definitely, I don't think anyone saw that coming. Dan Montgomery, 15 carries, 71 yards, and a touchdown. Stephon Diggs, 6 for 11, 74 yards, and a touchdown. Zay Flowers on Sunday night looked great. Got a carry for 40 yards and a touchdown. 5 for 8, 25 yards and a touchdown. Slides in Isaiah Likely here, which is kind of interesting. 4 for 6, 40. Might see a little more involvement as he gets more comfortable in that starting role. Todd doesn't have any other tight ends on his roster, so good on him for finding him. Tank Dell, who we talked about, 5 for 8, 50 yards and a touchdown. And we cannot talk about Tom's team without talking about the Dallas defense, who scores 15 points, 4 sacks, and a pick 6 on Thanksgiving. So 148.16, back in the driver's seat, back to scoring, a crap ton of points, 5-7. But as we mentioned before in the previous podcast, all he has to do is tie one of these teams that are in the playoff hunt, and he has the point advantage over them.
Yeah, Tom's team is certainly charging hard at this point with the 148 in Week 12. Really putting it together. I mean, it's been a solid team all season. Has gotten really unlucky with some of the opponents that he's faced. But as we said last week, if Tom with a win has the potential to really move a few spots, and that is exactly what he did. He gets this win. He picks up 3 spots to move from 11 to 8, getting very close now, just 1 spot away, 1 spot outside of the playoffs. The top 7 making the playoffs, of course. So, and he's done it with the familiar faces that we're getting to know, like C.J. Stroud and Tank Dell. I mean, these guys, this offense is going to be so much fun to watch if they're able to keep some of these guys together. They really look like I was going to say a Miami Light in some respects, but it may not be as far apart as you might think. There are some fast players on this team. They've got good balance, a good tight end, a couple of good receivers. The running game leaves a lot to be desired, but Singletary has kind of filled in admirably while they're getting this together. They've not reached their peak, but man, the Stroud to Dell connection is just exciting as anything. He's making a big play every single week. And as far as I'm concerned, unless the matchups really say otherwise, I mean, I'd find it very difficult to sit Stroud right now, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at his bench as well, Rashid Rice, 8 for 10, 107, and a touchdown. That's probably the only player I would probably think, but you're looking at Zay Flowers, just not very efficient, 5 for 8, it's only 25 yards. Maybe you sit Flowers for Rice, but I do agree. I think Tank Dell is just way too talented. He's the number 8 wide receiver now, or number 11 wide receiver in fantasy football, so I think you have to keep him in the lineup. You have your starting 3 of Diggs, Adams, and Tank Dell. I think that's a deadly trio there for Tom.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you just look up and down this roster. I mean, the fact that Rice went off on the bench, um, the fact that he's still got Damian Pierce, who's not really doing anything. Okay, so maybe the bench is not as strong as I was thinking, but that starting lineup, man, Devontae Adams, 5 for 7. Stephon Diggs had a nice game with a touchdown. David Montgomery, you wonder, when he came back a couple weeks ago, is Jahmyr Gibbs going to cut into his volume and make him not startable? But he's just fine. 15 carries, 71 yards, and a touchdown. Got a 2-point conversion as well. So, yeah, likely you mentioned the only tight end here. I mean, he was able to, I guess. Did he pluck him up recently? Was that a last week thing, or had he been carrying it? I'll tell you right now. Yeah, no.
Yep, $15. So actually, kind of a big spender for how late in the season we are.
Yep. I mean, has Darren Waller on IR, who could return, I think in a couple weeks potentially. But yeah, no, I like the move. I mean, he knew that he had to make that move. I thought Scott was going to make a move on Likely, but Tom goes ahead and does it. 6 fantasy points, 4 for 6, but I think Lamar was looking for him. We know what Likely can do. So this team, hey, they're right there, and they will be competing to get into that top 7 next week.
For sure. So good on Tom for getting back to where he was earlier in the year, scoring over 140 points. So good for Tom there. Not dead yet, as we have 2 more weeks to go in the regular season. Let's go over to Brian here. Now it goes to 5-7, 124.60.
Mission failed. We'll get him next time.
Let's just start with Jalen Hurts. Continues to be QB number 1 or QB number 2 between him and Josh Allen. 34 points, 3 touchdowns through the air, 2 touchdowns rushing. The brotherly shove, as they call it there in Philadelphia, proving to be fantasy excellence for Hurts. Jalen Hurts. Going down the board here, one of your favorite conversations is Breece Hall. Nothing doing here. Does get a little bit of involvement in the passing game, but only 7 for 25, 7 for 9 through the air for 24 yards. Javonte Williams, 18 carries, 65 yards. Not really doing much. Didn't get in the end zone. Devontae Smith, 7 for 8, 106 yards and a touchdown. So you like to see that as the second fiddle to A.J. Brown. Josh Downs, 5 for 13. You like the 13 targets, but not very efficient, 43 yards. Travis Kelce, 6 for 7, 91. You're hoping for a touchdown there. And Kareem Hunt, 7 for 22 against a resurgent Denver defense. Looking at his bench, not really much doing. He has Tajee Spears. He benched Terry McLaurin, which was kind of interesting. Rondale Moore, Khalil Herbert, who didn't really do much in his game return. He returned last week, but he also came back this week. But only played 21% of snaps, so kind of interesting there. Brian is now 5-7, but we just have some holes for Brian at the running back position, and that could stop him from winning some very winnable games in the future.
Yeah, I mean 5-7. That's tough to fall to 5-7, unless you've got a record like Tom. 5-7 looks very different if you're these two managers. I mean, man, just 16 points combined out of Hall and Williams is a disappointment. Neither of those guys, as you say, get into the end zone. It's funny when you see the 7 for 25 line and you're like, not great, not very efficient, and then you realize that it's his best rushing performance since week 5. So in terms of yards per carry, so like I said,
Okay.
that's how bad it has been in the yards per carry department. But yeah, I mean, Demario Douglas leaves this game early. I don't know. I think it was a concussion for Douglas. We'll see if he's able to get back into the lineup next week in a really favorable matchup against the Chargers. So I don't know. Brian's really got to put it together next week. It sucks to waste the performance from Jalen Hurts. He completed just 18 passes, but 3 of them were for touchdowns, and he ran 2 more into the end zone in that very exciting game, the win that the Eagles kind of the miracle win over the Buffalo Bills in Week 12. But I don't know. I mean, we've talked about it before with this team. Unless Kelsey is doing his like 20 to 30 point thing, he's doesn't seem to have enough firepower otherwise that can sort of all put it together at the same time. So when Kelsey has these, 12 fantasy points for a tight end, great, but he's sort of lacking this kind of game changing player that he needs to put up 20 or 30 points
And
in
I
any given.
and I would say I agree. 12 points for a tight end, but is 12 points good enough for your number 2 pick? No, it's not. 54 overall player in fantasy football. So what? That's 5th round. What is that around there, right?
Yep.
So yeah, you have probably the best tight end in the league, especially with Mark Andrews going down. Maybe you put T.J. Hawkinson in there, but just not getting enough. I wonder if he's kicking himself with that pick when he could have had Christian McCaffrey or Tyreek Hill or someone like that who can get production week in and week out. But yeah, Brian's in a little bit of a pickle here. He's going to try to sneak into the playoffs, but he needs more production out of Breece Hall and Javonte Williams to make that a possibility.
Well, and we should say that filling this flex spot is going to be critical, right? So
Yeah.
Kareem Hunt, I mean, boy, oh boy, Wolf. That again, tough game. Just 26% of the snaps. That's like where he was kind of in week 3 and 4 when he started the season for the Browns. It's just 7 carries. Again, I didn't really watch this game, obviously because there wasn't a lot of red zone activity.
I
There
don't think
wasn't a lot
anyone
of,
really watched this game, to be honest with you.
I mean, I don't know what happened. Like low scoring, but you would think in a low scoring game that these running backs would still be racking up yards, but I guess not.
Yeah, and
Um,
no targets in the passing attack, which is kind of interesting. I'm kind of interested to see where Pierre Strong ended up in terms of that because I can't look at it because this desktop thing sucks. That's fine. Yeah, it's just you can't have 2 out of your flex spot, and I mean Terry McLaurin is probably the guy you throw in there, um, but you still have Josh Downs and Demario Douglas, who you're not really sure what's going to happen with him. Might need to put Terry McLaurin there and figure something out at the flex spot. But let's go over to Dustin's team. Dustin is now 7-5 on the season. Now gunning for that 2nd overall spot with you. So he scores 146.66. Starts Baker Mayfield against Indianapolis, 199, 2 touchdowns. Nothing much doing. He did get hurt in this one, hurt his ankle. We're hoping for the best there. He did finish out the game, so maybe not too concerning, but he does have Sam Howell on the bench, who did outscore Baker Mayfield in this one. Jahmyr Gibbs, 11 carries, 54 yards. He continues to be an enigma. It doesn't make any sense. He needs to be touching the ball at least 20 times. He has 5 yards per carry, so it's just he's kind of stuck behind Dave Montgomery. It seems like they trust Dave Montgomery more in the red zone, and Jahmyr Gibbs is kind of that that gadget back that they're using for big time plays. Jonathan Taylor, who actually is going to be out for at least next week, maybe 2 weeks, 15 carries, 91 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So a big blow to Dustin, losing Jonathan Taylor for any amount of time, as he didn't have him at the beginning of the season as well. Jamar Chase, 81 yards, so you do like that with Jake Browning at the helm there in Cincinnati. Jalen Waddle, 8 for 8, 114. Like to see that against the Jets. You have Kyrie Williams finally back, 16 carries, 143 yards, 6 for 6 through the air, 61 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Probably the free agent acquisition of the year, I would say. Even though he was injured for quite some time, still the number 10 overall running back in fantasy football. And Miami scores 25 points, only 159 yards allowed, 7 sacks and a touchdown. Looking at his bench, as I mentioned, Sam Howell has a good day, 44 attempts, 300 yards, does run a touchdown in. Marquise Brown, 6 for 12, 88 yards, so a little bit of a resurgence back for Marquise Brown. Gabe Davis gets 12 targets, 105 yards, and a touchdown. So definitely some pieces that he might be able to fill in for Jonathan Taylor. Maybe we'll try to put Kyrie Williams there where Jonathan Taylor is and throw one of these wide receivers, into the flex spot. 146, 7-5. Can't really complain much if you're Dustin.
Not at all. If there's a team, I think, in this league that is sort of able to withstand an injury to a running back like Jonathan Taylor, I think it's probably Dustin's team. I think the strategy is exactly what you say. Everybody, it's next man up. Kyron Williams rushes right into that number 2 running back spot, and you end up starting a receiver in your flex. Next week, Marquise Brown, I think, will be in there. Gabe Davis has a bye in week 13. So you'll just make that switch, and you're good to go. So Dustin's team, very electric. 146 on the week is quite impressive. And that's even without some of these guys playing at like full strength. Jahmyr Gibbs, just 11 carries, 4 for 8 in the receiving game, but just didn't have that electric breakout play that we're so used to getting from Gibbs. So just 9 points. Jamar Chase, just 10 points. Puka Nacua, just 4 points. Kyle Pitts, just 3. So a lot of the guys that you expect more from had down weeks, and Dustin's 146 could have been even bigger. I also tend to agree with you that Kyron Williams has to be the pickup of the year. I'm kind of happy, and how much did I win with picking Kyron Williams up in my keeper league, where I can keep him for a 15th round pick next year, assuming that he can be anything like the lead running back that he has been for the Rams. And it's interesting because I'm wondering if Dustin was questioning how big of a workload he would get in his first game back. And sometimes you'll get messages in the week leading up from the team that says, his snaps might be limited, or they'll ease him back in. But you didn't have any of that for Kyron Williams. All you had was them releasing the guy that had filled in for him. So you knew that Kyron Williams was poised to make a quick comeback into the lineup for the Rams. He does. He gets 35 fantasy points to lead all running backs this week. So, Dustin's looking pretty good. 7-5. You start to build a little bit more confidence in making the playoffs. Another win and you're probably a guaranteed in. But 7-5, nice place to be, and moves into the 3rd spot.
Yeah, so out of these players that we're talking about, going to fill in for Jonathan Taylor next couple of weeks, Marquise Brown, Gabe Davis, I'll even throw in Taysom Hill. Out of those 3, who are you filling in next week? Hollywood Brown has, I think, Pittsburgh next week. Gabe Davis has a bye next week, so you're not playing him. And Taysom Hill has Detroit next week. I guess it's just Marquise Brown.
I think it's got to be Marquise Brown. Encouraging to see 12 targets, just 6 for 12, so maybe still a little bit of kinks to work out. They lost this game. They only scored 14 points in this one, despite being in comeback mode. So I feel a little bit better. I think you asked last week how concerned am I? And I was moderately concerned, but I think given the situation, he's a solid flex. I'm worried about him performing like a wide receiver 1 or 2 or anything like that, and probably not even a 3. But in a flex in a 3 receiver league, I'm here for it.
Yeah, and Marquise Brown just in week 12 had his most targets of the season at 12. So trending in the right direction for Marquise Brown after a couple weeks of lackluster performance.
I'd be curious why he gave the start to Baker Mayfield here over Sam Howell in a game where the Commanders were definitely going to be down no matter how you cut it, and they were throwing, but just couldn't muster enough efficiency for Howell or enough touchdowns. But 17 points compared to Mayfield's 13, not a big difference, didn't matter, wasn't going to matter, but just an interesting decision. I'm not exactly sure what Dustin was looking at there.
Maybe just the matchups. Dallas is a solid defense, and Indianapolis is not. So maybe you're just looking at that and saying, "Hey, I believe in Baker Mayfield more against the Indianapolis defense than I do against Sam Howell against Dallas." I can't believe that Howell got as many points with the score being what it was. So definitely lucky there, but it's kind of starting to show that Sam Howell is kind of matchup proof, I would say. He does have Miami next week, then a bye, Rams, Jets, San Fran. So actually not a great matchups there for Sam Howell. So it'll be interesting to see how Dustin moves forward with that. But let's go over to Mike's team. Mike now goes to 6-6, 106.16.
Emotional damage.
Looking at his quarterback, Josh Allen, number 1 quarterback, 2 touchdowns through the air, 2 touchdowns rushing, 81 yards rushing, 339 through the air. So you like to see that. Plug and play automatically. Travis Etienne, 20 carries. You like the volume, but only 56 yards. Little involvement in the passing attack. Brian Robinson, same kind of thing. 15 carries, 53 yards. Not really involved in the passing game. Had to start KJ Osborne here with another late Vikings game. 3 for 4, 34 yards. Justin Jefferson will be back this week, so good news for Mike.
Next week, he has a bye.
Oh, he has a bye next week. Okay, so yeah, the week after that he will be back. Christian Kirk, 4 for 7, 89 yards. DJ Moore, 11 for 13, 114 yards. Dalton Schultz, you're looking at this score, you're hoping for a little more. Only 2 targets on the day for 2 yards on 1 catch. Starts Ezekiel Elliott, 9 for 46. It's kind of what you're expecting out of him. Kind of interesting that he started Buffalo's defense against Philadelphia, but does get 4 points out of them. Looking at his bench, it's a lot of red. Justin Jefferson obviously didn't play. Devin Achane did not play. Mingo, 4 for 6, 60. He's a starting wide receiver, so he should be rostered. And Jeff Wilson, 11 carries, 56 yards, 8 points. As we've always said, Mike has a very talented team. Can he survive without his 2 biggest playmakers other than Josh Allen? He is 6-6. If I had to guess, he's probably going to end the playoffs with Achane coming back and then Jefferson coming back the week after. But it's definitely, you can't have some of these injuries that he's had where, Achane touches the ball 2 times and then goes out, and then you lose a week because of that.
This is the same story every week for Mike, and we talk about it on the pod every week that he's trying to weather this storm, but it's not looking very good at the moment. I mean, the fact that Jefferson hopefully will be back when after his bye, you're still going to miss him in the bye, and then you'll get him back the week afterwards. But you can't really afford a loss. And by the way, when he comes back, Josh Dobbs, Vikings quarterback.
Yes, Josh
Not
Dobbs.
Romeo Dobbs. Josh Dobbs. Didn't look very good. I didn't watch any of this game, but just from what I've heard.
Well, you saved yourself a lot of pain because I watched this game, and it was pretty abysmal on both sides.
Right. So all of a sudden, there was a question about McConnell had to answer whether Dobbs is going to be his starting quarterback after the bye. So very weird vibes there. And man, Devon Achane, I think we talked about him last week, and you kind of reassured me a little bit that he would be playing when we were talking about Mostert's role. And, is there a question? I kind of said, I don't know. And I'm going to say that again about this coming week. I was listening to some fantasy analysis earlier, and someone said that they would be shocked if they put Achane out there on the field in Washington, which is notoriously bad for running backs and for suffering injuries. That's his matchup next week. He said, I would be shocked if the Dolphins put him on that field. So very interesting storylines here. I mean, will he be without both of these guys? And by the way, Michael Thomas, we don't really talk about that. He was a consistent starter, I think, at points during the season for Mike. And the fact that he has been on IR for a couple weeks now just adds to the frustration for this team. I mean, boy, you get a 39-point massive mega performance in the second half from Josh Allen, and you get 10 from Travis Etienne, who was really inefficient, under 3 yards a carry on the ground. You got Brian Robinson kind of having his worst game in a little while, 15 for 53 again. The efficiency's not there, and when you don't get into the end zone, guys like that have a really capped upside in fantasy football.
For sure, and I wouldn't even say there's really anything that he would change. Maybe you throw in Jeff Wilson instead of Ezekiel Elliott as long as Achane is out, because he did look good in that game. So, and they play Washington next week, so maybe Jeff Wilson gets in for a little junk time action. But that's really the only thing that I see on this team. Is just a very thin squad right now with Jefferson and Achane being out. But once they're back, he is a very dangerous team. It just might be a little bit too late, if these guys don't come back. And, you can't put together wins in the next 2 weeks. He might be on the outside looking in.
Yeah, I mean, having to start KJ Osborne, not great.
But let's go to our next matchup, and that would be Alex versus Sarah. Alex now goes to 3-9 on the season, so good for Alex, getting his third win on the season as I look for a drop. Let's play this one.
Victory Screech!
Okay, so looking at Alex's squad, Trevor Lawrence, a respectable 24 points, 364 through the air and a touchdown. Does carry one into the end zone as well. Josh Jacobs, 20 carries, 110 yards and a touchdown, and a lopsided loss to Kansas City. Tutu Atwell, who was a late addition to the squad, 3 for 3, 76 yards. You'll take 9 points out of him every single day of the week. Bijan Robinson, I guess he was on Arthur Smith's good side this week, 16 carries, 91 yards and a touchdown, also receiving touchdown as well. Obviously 3-9, not in the playoff conversation, but did really act like a spoiler for Sarah this week in week 12. Let's look at his bench. Jared Goff has 18 points. Curtis Samuel, 9 for 12, 100 yards. And doesn't start the Eagles defense or Jalen Ferguson, which turned out to be good moves. So, like I said, 3-9, not really in the playoff conversation, but does spoil Sarah's hopes a little bit in the next coming 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I was worried about Alex there for a little while. I think for a little bit, good part of the week, right up close to game time or the day before, he was missing a couple players, made the moves to fill out his starting lineup, and did get the 120-point win. A nice win, a nice point total for Alex in a miserable year. We talked about playing the role of spoiler, and for this one, this was a tough one for Sarah to lose, but she moves to 5-7, and Alex at 3-9. I mean, boy, it's kind of the people performing the way they should perform. Trevor Lawrence, 24 fantasy points. Good. It was a good decision, right? Compared to Goff. Yeah, it was a good decision. So, recognizing that Lawrence has maybe turned a corner with his 32-point performance last week, knowing that this was a Houston team that might be some points scored in this game, could have been more points scored in this game. Lawrence ends up having a nice day. Josh Jacobs continues under Antonio Pierce, Raiders team. Got the loss against Kansas City, but played pretty tough. I really like the way they're playing, and Jacobs is certainly a big part. He goes for 20 fantasy points on 20 carries for 110 yards and a touchdown. The receivers, nothing special. George Kittle, kind of a down game for him. Bijan Robinson, you mentioned. I mean, goodness, he's so electric. I watched it, all of these great breakout plays from Bijan on NFL Red Zone, and man, he looks so shifty. He's able to turn a small hole into a big opening. He's skilled in the receiving game. I mean, the touchdown throw was great. The connection was excellent. He's fun to watch, and hopefully Arthur Smith continues to let us watch him some more. So a nice day, 11 points from your Vikings defense. So good for Alex on getting that third win of the season.
Yeah, for sure. Everything goes well when Josh Jacobs and Bijan Robinson get involved. It's been those weeks where they haven't been involved in the offense that Alex has really struggled. So good to see there. Still has Noah Brown on the bench. Somebody else on IR that I cannot see. Jalen Ferguson, who is very talented. So does have some options to pick and choose who he's going to start, who he's not going to start, but does get his third win of the season and maybe a little more confidence going into Week 13, whoever he is playing.
Absolutely, and it is T. Higgins on the IR.
T. Higgins, okay.
When he comes back, you probably don't feel great about that.
No.
But I don't know if you mentioned, if you did, I was not paying attention, but Curtis Samuel on the bench, 9 for 12 for 100 yards. Nice to see those targets for him. He had been struggling mightily, but those 12 targets might be enough to earn him a slot in the lineup against Miami in a game that they're going to be throwing. So, potentially, probably Robert Woods you take out, although I could also see Tutu Atwell as well. I think you probably get Curtis Samuel back in there next week.
For sure. I totally agree with that. You probably have to get Samuel back in the lineup. It looks like more of his early season successes than what's the recent track record has been. He scores 14 points. Let me just look this up real quick. Yeah, through week 4 through week 6, 14, 15, and 12. So more to that and, less of the 1 point, 1.6, and 4 of his last 3 games. But let's go over to Sarah here. She goes to 5-7 on the year. If I stop clicking off it, that'd be great. 5 for 7, 105, 98. Defeated. She is defeated in this one. Starts Justin Fields in that horrible game on Monday night, 27 for 37, 217. Loses 2 fumbles in this matchup against the Vikings. Jerome Ford, 9 for 65, 4 for 7 through the air, 14 yards. Devin Singletary saves his day through the air, only 6 for 18 rushing, but 6 for 7, 54 yards from C.J. Stroud. Cortland Sutton, kind of disappointing, 3 for 6, 61 yards. A.J. Brown does get in the end zone here, but his efficiency was, left to be desired. 5 for 9, 37 yards, and a touchdown. Drake London, 5 for 7, 91 yards. Sam Laporta, 5 for 6, 47 yards, and a touchdown with the octopus there. And Chris Godwin, 3 for 7, 45 yards. Definitely a disappointing season for Chris Godwin, who's now the 39th ranked wide receiver in fantasy football. I was thinking that you're hoping for a little more than that. She does have 2 quarterbacks on the bench, Derek Carr and Jordan Love. Jordan Love looked great in this one, 22 for 32, 268, 3 touchdowns. A.J. Dillon, he's just a guy. Jahad Dotson, average day, and David Njoku, 6 for 9, 59 yards. My question is, all right, Justin Fields has a bye next week. So I'm guessing you're going Jordan Love over Derek Carr next week? Jordan Love has KC. Derek Carr has
Detroit. Yeah,
Detroit.
It's close. It's close. Part of me really wants to say Carr. I think my gut wants to go with Carr there. But Jordan Love has played better as of late. His receivers have looked really good. So it's close. They're probably back to back for me.
Okay. But I didn't mention this. She didn't have Kenneth Walker in this one. So, you have to start Devin Singletary and Jerome Ford. She really needs Walker back. I don't know if he's going to play this week on a short week. They're playing Thursday. So she's probably not going to have him for another week. They get the mini bye, so hopefully in week 14 she will have him back. But maybe at that point it doesn't really matter. 5-7, teetering on that, that cliff where you could just fall off. Another loss really doesn't look good for her. So probably needs to win the next two to realistically have a chance to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, and I would just say one. You mentioned kind of this lineup decisions here. So like Chris Godwin or AJ Dillon or David Njoku, because of all of those, David Njoku has been really consistent. You can start two tight ends. You can start a tight end in the flex. Njoku's last 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7, 15, 10, 8, 9, 8. Like, you want a consistent, and that's been under multiple quarterbacks. I think that's been a couple guys. So, I don't know. I'd be tempted to throw Njoku in there potentially.
Interesting call there. I don't know if I agree with that, but yeah, I mean, just Chris Godwin has just been so inconsistent this year. His high of 15 points, I think it is, and you're expecting a lot more. Definitely the quarterback change from Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield has not been beneficial to Chris Godwin, and doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon for him, so you probably have to find a way to get him out of the lineup.
So he's consistently 6 or 7 targets. Let's see, Njoku is consistently 8, 9 plus. So target-wise, I don't know. I think it's closer than you'd think.
Okay. Well, keep that in mind, Sarah, when you're listening to this. But let's go to our next matchup. That would be Charlie versus Josh. Charlie gets 110.42 on the year to go to 6-6 on the season. Let's do the clapping. Back to 500 for Charlie. Patrick Mahomes gets a respectable 20 points, 298 through the air, 2 touchdowns. Derrick Henry, 18 carries, 76 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground. James Cook, 16 carries, 43 yards, but saves the day through the air, 6 for 7, 57 yards. Deebo Samuel, back to his days of last year and maybe the year before that, does everything here. 4 carries, 15 yards and a touchdown, 7 for 9 through the air for 79 yards. Keenan Allen against Baltimore, 16 targets for 106. Does have the fumble loss, which does hamper his score a little bit. Jordan Addison, 6 for 10, 39 yards. You like the targets, but not really pushing the ball downfield in that really defense-heavy game. Jonnu Smith scores a big fat 0, so I guess that experiment is over there in Atlanta. Star Shakir here, 3 for 5, 47 yards, which I kind of alluded to last week. So 110.42, kind of on the lower end of the scores, but does get the victory. Looking at his bench, Jacoby Myers, 6 for 7, 79 yards and a touchdown. Maybe he's back a little bit. That's about it on his bench, basically. Watson, 1 for 3, 3 yards and a touchdown. But yeah, gets the win, goes to 6-6, so can't really complain about too much there.
Yeah, other than, it's interesting. You had a winner and a loser in this game, but both Josh and Charlie both dropped 1 spot each in the rankings. Charlie from 5 to 6 and Josh from 10 to 11 this week. So Josh now the second worst team in the standings, but Charlie right on the on the cusp, 6-6 is right in the mix. He's currently number 6, and I guess it's the low yardage total. I guess losing a spot in the rankings probably means that he was outscored by somebody to move up a little bit. But just 110 points, solid week. You really do hope to get more out of Addison while Jefferson's out. I think probably he becomes a guy now that may be unstartable. When Jefferson is back, he's obviously not starting him next week on bye. And Charlie, again, is in one of these teams that, a win could solidify something and a loss could, knock you right out of it. But, I think he may be forced into starting Jacoby Myers next week. And you just hope that maybe he is back. He started the year so amazingly great in that Raiders offense, struggling a lot recently, but 6 for 7 gets into the end zone here. He played 91% of snaps. So I like his potential. And you know what? As I'm touting him up for next week, he is also on bye. So Charlie is going to have a couple bye issues here, I think. But
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. One other note, because it's interesting, and I don't like to say it because it's about Justin Tucker, but Justin Tucker's field goal miss this week means that Younghoe Koo is currently the NFL's leading, has the highest kick made percentage in NFL history at 90%. Justin Tucker falls to something like 89.8% or something like that. But that's with a minimum, I think, of 100.
Yeah, I think it's like 100 and something less kicks though. So,
Yep.
so yeah, interesting there.
Oh, couple hundred. It's like 450 to like 160 or something.
Okay.
That's a big difference.
But this team's going to go as Derrick Henry and James Cook go, I would say. Also Deebo Samuel and, kind of those two pairs of Keenan Allen, Deebo Samuel, Derrick Henry and Cook. But because after that, there's not a lot to be really excited about. Maybe the X factor is Jacoby Jones, but like you said, he's Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Jones. I said Jacoby Jones. Jacoby Myers. He's on bye next week, so definitely needs a lot of the bulk of his points out of those four players. If he doesn't get it, then he's going to start stacking losses. But this week it turns out great, and he's 6-6, and he's on his way to maybe getting into the playoffs. 7-6, you're probably getting in. So good to see there for.
Well, look, here's a game.
Sure.
I mean, like he's going to need he'll need two of this massive mediocrity is what I'm going to call it. He'll need two next week, and remind me who. So Addison is on bye, and so is Jacoby Myers. So take Addison out. Myers stays on the bench because he's on bye. You need two flex. You need a wide receiver 3 and a flex. Go.
Wide receiver 3 and a flex without those.
Like if Joe Flacco starts, maybe Elijah Moore.
Maybe you do like the 9 targets. You probably go Zay Jones and Elijah Moore. I know it's not great. I mean, who else are you gonna go? Watson? I mean, not really involved. Boyd with Jake Browning.
Not a good time to be one of the only, maybe the only owner with $0 left.
There's a couple.
Yeah, well, so like this is like the picture perfect example of what could happen if you spend all your money too early. Right? This is a situation where he desperately needs somebody from the waiver wire to start for him on the brink of playoff contention. So it'll be interesting to see what he does here.
But let's go over to Josh's team here. The league low in points this week at 84 points.
You failed!
So looking at his squad, starts Josh Dobbs, nothing doing there, 4.5 points, 185 through the air, 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions against Chicago. Austin Eckler doesn't really look the same. 10 carries, 32 yards, a little bit of involvement in the passing attack, but nothing really doing there. Did lose a fumble. Keaton Mitchell was actually his best running back this week. 9 for 64. I can see his role expanding as the season goes on. That's just a little bit of a taste of that. Adam Thielen, after that blazing start to begin the season, scored 11 points last week, but 7-5. Just a disappointing day and a really bad offense. Maybe a change is in order, and a change is welcome there for Josh there in Carolina. Jalen Reed, 2 for 6 on the ground, 4 for 8, 34 yards, and a touchdown. Brandon Ayuk only has 4 targets, but 50 yards and a touchdown. Trey McBride, 7 for 9, 60 yards. So you like to see that. And just looking at his bench, you had Chua Hubbard, which is very interesting. What's his role going to be for the Panthers with the new offense there? Does sit Garrett Wilson, who actually does get in the end zone against Miami. So maybe some questionable managerial decisions. I don't know if you're starting, Adam Thielen over Garrett Wilson anymore. But just a disappointing day when you get 4.5 points out of your quarterback.
Yeah, or Tyler Lockett. I mean, that's another kind of questionable. It's almost like Jaden Reed is the must-start number 2 receiver right now for Josh, which is just interesting. Adam, in truth, I didn't watch that Bears-Vikings game because I went to bed last night. I went to bed early. I didn't want to watch the game, so I went to bed. And I didn't want to watch the game because I thought it was inevitable. I don't want to rub it in that I was going to have to be doing the shotgun challenge this week. I thought I was totally the worst team. And I woke up and I didn't even want to check the fantasy app because I knew that I was the lowest on the week. And I scroll down and I see 84. And I'm like, whoa, what the hell happened? And I see that Josh Dobbs, I actually think, and it might have just been because it was on my first alarm of the morning. When I opened it, I think Josh Dobbs may have even had like 2.5 points. It might have been a stat correction in the next couple hours, but 4.5 points, and I needed Hawkinson to do something, and he did something. But man, I thought I was resigned to my fate and glad to not be in that bottom spot. But yeah, just a really tough week. I mean, Eckler, you keep saying it. You've said it for a couple weeks. Something's not right. 10 for 32, 5 for 6, fumbled again. So, this man. Brandon Staley is going to get fired, right?
Is it Brandon Staley or Joe Staley? No, it's Brandon Staley, I think.
It's Brandon Staley. He's got a real punchable face, and he just looks
he treats the media really, awful, too. They say, are you still going to call the defense? And, he's like, no, I'm still going to call the defense. You keep asking me that each week. I'm still going to. I was like, okay, chill, dude.
Well, that was after a loss, and I don't know. Is he always that way, or was that just, I think that might have been just frustration getting the better of him. But, yeah, so not being able to rely on Eckler for the draft value that you got him for is that's a killer. Adam Thielen, man, I'm in the same position. I'm like, can I start somebody else over him at this point? And then you kind of remind yourself that, hey, it's a great matchup at Tennessee. Let's see if Thielen can get it back. And he goes 1 for 3 for 2 yards. 3 targets he gets in this game. That's just crazy.
Yeah, there's nobody else there. He should at least get 7 to 8 targets every game.
Is it Mingo that's the second?
Yeah.
Guy. I guess it's Chuba Hubbard that's the second. He ends up with 5 for 5 through the air. And as you say, had a nice game. So, I mean, that's some stuff on the bench there. But, man, if Dobbs is going to be Dobbs of last night or anything close to it, that's it.
Yeah, and the only other quarterback on Josh's team is Bryce Young.
Nope.
Who actually scored more points than Josh Dobbs last night. So, but yeah, it's just it might. Is that 5-7? He might be the weakest 5-7 team in the league, and things are not looking good. Only way he can come back is if Austin Eckler gets magically healthy and Thielen starts getting the targets like he used to at the beginning of the season. But other than that, things are looking bleak for Josh's playoff prospects going forward.
It's very possible. I don't know if you've done the calcs on this. It's very possible that he is eliminated. Would we know if he was eliminated?
Well, so if you're looking at playoffs right now, I mean, you're never really eliminated if you can tie a team because you could have insane points.
Right.
So. What is it, 1 through 7?
We're not gonna do this right now. That would take me 3 hours to.
Well, no, I'm just saying he's 11th, so he is almost last. So in terms of the points scored, it's not looking good for him either. There are 3 other 5 and 7 teams that have substantially more points than he does, so not looking good for Josh. Really needs some big points in the next 2 weeks. Yep. But let's go over to our last matchup of the day, also our lowest scoring matchup of the day. That would be your matchup with Scott. Scott gets the victory. He goes to 6-6 on the season, 100.66.
Victory!
Starts Russell Wilson, 13 for 22, 134, throws a touchdown, also runs in a touchdown, which kind of saves his day. Starts Zach Charbonnet with Kenneth Walker going out. Kind of a respectable day. I guess a tough defense, 14 carries, 47 yards, 4 for 4 through the air. Isaiah Pacheco, who has the funniest running style of any NFL quarterback I've ever seen. He looks like he just stomps the ground when he runs. You can find that memes on TikTok and what have you. 15 carries, 55 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Little involvement in the air, 5 for 5, 34 yards. Amari Cooper, who leaves this one, 2 for 6, 16 yards. Wondering about his health. He was injured towards the end of the game. So we're not sure what's up with his status. Cooper Kupp, not really doing much. Michael Pittman, who's been probably the biggest bright spot in terms of production you're not really expecting. 10 for 13, 107 yards. Definitely benefited from Gardner Minshew being the quarterback there in Indianapolis. Garrett Everett, who replaced Mark Andrews, 4 for 4, 43 yards and a touchdown. Tony Pollard, who's put together, 2 straight pretty good games, a 16 and a 19. 13 carries, 79 yards and a touchdown, 6 for 6. Catching the football, 24 yards. And does start, his kicker gets a negative with missing an extra point, and his defense gets 0. So does get the win, but only 100 points. So much more to be desired. As I always forget, I'm going to look at his bench for a second. Gus Edwards finally ends his touchdown streak. Tyler Algier, 10 carries, 64 yards. Kind of interesting there. Doesn't start DeAndre Hopkins, 3 for 5, 49. Nothing much doing. Does have Rico Dowell, which is kind of interesting, I guess. I saw his name kind of on waiver wire pickup kind of threads. Not much involvement, but does get in the end zone. 100 points, not great, but does get the victory and keeps his playoff hopes alive.
He does indeed, and quite a fun matchup, low scoring, but lots of Thanksgiving Day intrigue that I was paying attention to for sure. Scott, of course, gets the rough start with the Lions. His Lions stack, as you say, of kicker and defense, both combining for negative 0.5 points. As you mentioned, the kicker, Patterson, missed an extra point, and that's all he did. So kind of intriguing, follows it up, gets a nice performance later in the day from Tony Pollard in that Washington game on Thanksgiving. Gets into the end zone, 13 for 79. Is looking better-ish. His yards per carry the last 2 weeks, 5 last week, 6 this week. His 2 highest of the season, essentially. Was running back, has been a top 12 running back the last 2 weeks, and has a nice matchup with Seattle on tap. So that's the good news. The bad news, you mentioned Amari Cooper leaves this game, status up in the air, quarterback up in the air, the Browns season up in the air. I mean, just a weird situation there. Amari Cooper, not feeling great about him. And if you watched any of this game with the Rams, there's not feeling a whole lot, not a lot of good feelings around Cooper Kupp. It's essentially pretty clear at this point that he's not 100% and kind of not close to it. Almost like what Joe Burrow looked like earlier in the year, where his performance was very clearly and obviously affected by his injury. There have been reports, and I think he may have even said that, he's going to be playing injured to some degree for the rest of the season. And if this is what it's going to be, you don't feel very good about it.
No, especially your first round draft pick. Kind of the same situation with, I'd say even worse, situation that Brian's in, where it's just your first round draft pick not living up to the expectations. Now number 63 on the season. Did miss the first 4 games, but has been back since, and only gone over 15 points twice since his return Definitely not what you like to see for Cooper Kupp. My question, Mari Cooper's out next week, let's say. Who are you throwing in the starting lineup from this ragtag group of marginal wide receivers and running backs?
Let's see. We've got DeAndre Hopkins against Indianapolis. Tyler Algier, who, despite not playing a lot when he's on the field, he's getting carries. I mean, he's basically his low in carries on the year is 7 a couple times. He's got 8, 9. Otherwise, he's over, double digits. He's got a nice matchup against a Jets defense that does allow quite a lot of production out of the running back spot. So that's kind of interesting. Dowdle is a handcuff as long as Pollard is playing well in the starting lineup here for Scott. I don't know. I think but then there's Edwards' opportunity to get into the end zone. That's close. But wait, the Ravens are on bye, so I guess it's easy.
Well, and you have to pick a wide receiver.
Oh, he needs a receiver?
Well, I guess you could put. I wish you could put. I think you can put in Pollard for a Charbonnet, if you wish, and then you have a flex spot open at that point. But
if Walker's out on Thursday, I think that who's that? That's a tough matchup though at San Francisco.
No, they just played San Francisco.
Oh, sorry, at Dallas. That's just as bad.
Yeah. We still need to pick a wide receiver, so you're picking. Well, I guess you have to pick Hopkins. He's the only other wide receiver.
There's no one else here. That's why I was so confused by the question. I'm like, well, I guess I need a flex here. So not a lot of roster flexibility. Again, we said I thought he was going to drop Aaron Rodgers or Mark Andrews to sort of maybe get somebody that could help him. He didn't do that either of those things. So, I don't know. We'll see.
But let's go over to your squad here, now 7-5, 91.02. You only had 2 people hit their projections out of your starting lineup.
Bruh.
How do you know that? Where does it tell you that?
On the there's just a lot of red on your team. You'll have to watch the show.
Oh, I didn't know the desktop app could do that. That's kind of useful information.
Well, It doesn't tell you their projection, but it just tells you if they went under it with the red.
Got it.
Which is stupid, but they should, because they have like 2 numbers like matched up with. It should be the projection on the bottom and then the actual score at the top. But whatever. So looking at Tua Tagovailoa, your concerns are starting to look more valid with the tough matchups coming up. Only scores 7.8 points, 243 through the air, throws 2 picks, loses a fumble, so turnover city for Tua there. Jaylen Warren gets outshined by Najee Harris, which I didn't think I'd say a couple weeks ago, but 13 carries, 49 yards, does lose a fumble here, so I don't know how Mike Tomlin feels about the doghouse, but I don't know if he's in it or not. Saquon Barkley, nothing doing against that tough Patriots front 7, 12 carries, 46 yards, 1 for 3 through the air for 6 yards. CeeDee Lamb comes back down to earth. Still has a good game, 4 for 9, 53 yards and a touchdown, and a 2-point conversion. But, his streak of 100 yards is now over, I think, right? No, he had 38 last week as well, but he did score a touchdown. Nico Collins, 7 for 9, 104 and a touchdown. Metcalf, if we're talking about bad trades, 3 for 9, 32 yards, very disappointing there. Hockenson does get in the end zone. James Conner, since coming back, hasn't gone over 8 points. Has a 5-point here, 6 for 27. Nothing good there. Let's look at your bench. Matthew Stafford does have a good game, 4 touchdowns, so maybe that's something interesting. Calvin Ridley, of course, when you sit him, 5 for 6, 89 yards and a touchdown, 2-point conversion. And San Francisco's defense against Seattle scores 16 compared to the Cleveland's 6. My question for you is, are you pulling the trigger on Matthew Stafford over Tua next week? Next week, Tua has Washington. Okay, probably not. And Stafford has Cleveland. Okay, so I can answer that question for you. Well, okay, so how concerned are you about Tua? I mean, is this just a matchup that was a bad matchup, or is there a little more to read into this?
Well, I'm concerned, and I have been concerned for several weeks. I mean, he has had some tough defenses that he's struggled against here recently, New England, Kansas City. Raiders, believe it or not, have a decent defense, and so do the Jets. Has struggled in those games, but struggled the week before that in Week 7 against Philly, which is a good matchup for quarterbacks typically. So he's run into some trouble here, and I'm a little bit nervous. I mean, hopefully this is a get-right game to reassure me a little bit against Washington before, like I said, going into what is a fantasy playoff nightmare situation with the Jets, again, a team that just held them to 7 points this week, and then Dallas and Baltimore, two of the best defenses in the league. So I'm more than a little concerned about Tua at this point in time. And I'm concerned maybe even more so about James Conner. I mean, this was a situation that I was hoping would be more like the Kyron Williams situation of, hey, you're back from IR, get your ass in the lineup and run 20 times a game. Be like, you're the featured guy. Gets 14 carries last week, but only 6 this week. I mean, they lost badly in this one, but just 42% of snaps. Was a little bit involved in the passing game, 4 for 5, but I am just concerned about his overall production, and his ceiling looks to be really limited at this point in time.
And I mean,
7 points.
Also, just not to cut you off, but looking at his next matchups here, Pittsburgh, then a bye, San Fran, Chicago, who looks very good at run defensively, and then Philadelphia. So that is your playoff matchup for James Conner. Not looking great for him.
Not great. And, I'm really hoping that Aaron Jones gets back, but as each day goes by, I get kind of less and less hopeful. All signs point to almost them shutting him down, perhaps. I mean, I guess, what's their record? I don't even know what Green Bay. They won this week.
They beat Detroit, yeah.
Detroit. Yeah.
They're like 500.
So maybe if they've still got a shot at the playoffs and A.J. Dillon maybe is not looking so hot, and they really need some a difference maker in the game, especially catching passes out of the backfield, then maybe he does get back. But I don't know. I grow less and less hopeful. So, I've been kind of mediocre as of late here this week. But TJ Hawkinson continues his dominance. He continues to be probably my best pick of the draft, I would say. Is going to be on bye next week. I am currently tight endless. So I'm going to be looking for options here for next week. Don't put this out before waivers run, Adam, please. Because I just may have given away the game. Anyway,
I can edit that out.
You should. Definitely should. So I don't know. Calvin Ridley, look, it's I didn't think I could trust him and go back to him after the great performance last week. It turns out maybe he is earning a little bit more trust. 3 of his last 4 with 11 or more fantasy points. Does have some really tough matchups on the slate, including Cleveland and Baltimore in a couple weeks. But yeah, we'll see what happens.
For sure. So, yep, you now go to 7 and 5. Let's just take a quick pick at the playoff picture here. I obviously have the first round locked up, ready to go. You and Dustin are fighting for 7 and 5 at the second spot. Then we got 3 teams at 6 and 6. That would be Mike, Jake, and Charlie, and Scott. And then we have 4 teams at 5 and 7. So still a lot of movement left to go for the playoffs. And these points for, pay attention to this, because that is the tiebreaker if you tie records. So definitely put up your best lineups, put up your it's really important to try to win, but also score as many points as you possibly can in that win, to try to get some edge on some of these tiebreakers. Right now, out of all those teams, Tom has the highest amount of points, so he's in the driver's seat there, followed by Mike at 6 and 6. He also is pretty high up there as well in terms of the main wild card cutoff team. So definitely wins are good, but scoring a lot of points is even better. So
we did talk earlier. I asked the question of, like, if Josh wins his next 2, is it possible that he's has so few points that he could be eliminated? He's got, what is that, 86 points less than the next lowest in the league, and that's Alex in 12th. 12-11 for Josh.
Yeah, I mean, it's not looking good.
Yeah. So, league's lowest score. That would be a miracle to make the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure.
This late in the season. So.
But that's our show for week 12. We hope you enjoyed it as always, and we'll be back for week 13. Maybe we'll do some playoff coverage and see how that transpires after next week's games. Will be a lot clearer. So we thank you for listening, and we hope to see you back next week. Goodbye, everyone.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed the show, please remember to like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify.